Okay, so now it's live, and just need to wait for the attendees to join in. Okay, so there's a couple of, okay, there's a couple of people that are joined in right now. And just give a quick minute for more people to join in, and then we can start off. Okay, I think we can start now, and so it's my pleasure to welcome you all for this second public webinar in the French American Innovation Day series on Cities of Tomorrow. In this series, we try to explore the important questions of security and trust in the digital age, looking at different technological and practice innovations in the management of cities between France and the US. I'm Kevin Coquillon. I'm Deputy Attaché for Science and Technology at the Embassy of France in the US. But I will leave the floor very quickly to Dr. Agnès Julien, who is the Vice President for International Affairs at Université Gustave Eiffel. She is also the Executive Committee Chairwoman of the Forum of European and National Highway Research Laboratories, and she will give a couple of words of support for our event. Dr. Agnès Julien, if you can.
Yes.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say it's always a pleasure for me to introduce a scientific seminar because I'm a researcher, and research is always in the center and in the heart of our university, which is research-based. This university was created last year and is focused on cities of tomorrow, which is the topic of your seminar. My colleagues are very much focused on several topics. Building the cities, there are many scientific research topics for the city of tomorrow. One is very important, is dedicated to the water, which is the topic of today. Then digital changes and how the citizens will use these changes is also very significant. And there are a lot of debates, including technological aspects, which are necessary, and some others, the use of them. So the community of the University Gustave Eiffel has a strong habit with partnerships with the US colleagues, scientific partnerships, and also is very used to go to Washington, DC in January for TRB, annual TRB meetings, because some of us work on transport and have been working on transport for many years. And coming to TRB, we meet the embassy, the colleagues of the embassy, and all the community. So we lead discussions with the director of TRB in person every year, discussing on the topic, the scientific topic. So usually transport, but now we are enlarging these topics, and water would be also one of them, as well as all kind of topics that could be linked to the cities. So I would like to wish you a fruitful seminar for your discussion, and we will have opportunities to meet maybe in the near future when the COVID will be pushed aside. And so have a nice end of the afternoon for the French side and a good day for the others. So see you later, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Julien. Thank you for your words of encouragement. And without further ado, I would like to quickly introduce Professor Tianhong Cui, who is a distinguished McKnight University professor at the University of Minnesota. Professor Cui holds many honorific titles, so I'm not going to list them all here, but I will let him present the process of polymer shrinkage, a technique that he is developing to help create microsensors. And so please, Professor Cui, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Kevin, for your nice introduction. I also very much appreciate the invitation from France Embassy, especially just hear the remarks from Agnes. It's very promising message delivered to the community in both France and the US. So today, I'm also very pleased to see a lot of many old friends, collaborators like Professor Tarek Bruyne. He and I have been working together for the last few years. And actually, I was interact with many colleagues like Martin, Dan, and also Christina from Johns Hopkins as well. So today, I switched a little bit my research topic from the topic that Kevin just mentioned to a topic titled Research on Water at University of Minnesota. Try to make it a little bit broader today. So as you know, water is the source of life in nature. We have to rely on water in a daily basis, especially in Minnesota. We have many lakes and rivers, the so-called 10,000 lakes state. Actually, we have over 11,000 lakes, many rivers, including the origin of Mississippi River, Minnesota River, St. Croix River, and so on and so forth. Many rivers are very clear and clean, not only mentioned in the US, in Minnesota, in the United States, but globally. However, there are many lakes and rivers, especially surface waters and groundwater has been contaminated. This is actually a contamination from a local industry that actually water being contaminated by heavy metals, chemicals. There's many chemicals contaminate water. Especially like Minnesota, we are suggested not eat more than one meal of fish per week, because in early ages, some water being contaminated by mercury, and the fishes intake some some mercury and build up in their body, so it's not safe to eat it. And actually, a lot of water also because of the nutrient from fertilizer, from agriculture. As you know, the Midwest of United States, we have a lot of lands, flat lands, and the farmers grow the crops and the soybeans and so on and so forth. The excessive nutrients that being applied to the field that eventually being flooded through lakes, and nutrients like nitrogen that actually grow the toxic algae in the water and change water into green color. There is a little kid play. We don't want our kids to play in a lake surface water like this, not mention the drinking water. Actually, there are more than 18 million premature deaths every year, according to Lucent. That's one of famous medical journal per year because of the water pollutant. And actually, in U.S. only, more than 200,000 violation of the standard in a yearly basis. So before we talk a little bit about my own research, I'd like to talk about the research effort at University of Minnesota, especially in Minnesota. We have a so-called Minnesota Water Resources Center that actually a cluster of faculty members working on waters. I still remember years ago, Christine was invited to give a talk at University of Minnesota. I appreciate the director, Professor Jeffrey Peterson, share some slide with us. I'd like to talk about this centralized, facility, structures people have been working on. So the University of Minnesota Water Resources Center is one of the 55 national institutes for water resources relevant research. From the chart, you can see all over the country, there are many research institutions focused on water relevant research. The University of Minnesota is one of them because we cover a lot of lakes and rivers, as I just mentioned. And the University of Minnesota's Water Resources Center is a unit of University of Minnesota Extension, and actually affiliated with the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resources Sciences, the so-called CFANS. CFANS is the College of Agriculture, Food, and so on and so forth. That's actually people have been working on, because these are relevant. The water relevant to food, food relevant to the agriculture, and so on so forth. So these people are working together, not only from this college, but also across the campus, and interact with many other local people trying to do the work. So the center, what the center do is they do research, a lot of research work, and they do a lot of education, not only educate the student, but also educate the local people, and actually globally, and do a lot of engagement, and also trying to communicate with the local society. So the Water Resource Center has expertise in between water research and people, civilian people, and also the Minnesota Pollutant Control Agency, EPA, in the federal level, and also with the people who working on soil and lands and so on and so forth. This is really an interaction between water, people, and land, trying to do a lot of work relevant to make sure this is we have the these people who has different expertise to pass on the research that actually people care about. So as you know, the water is one of the global problems that people has been working on. So the focus area of the water resources go all the way from agriculture, rural water salt, and urban stormwaters, and also the groundwater and drinking waters, decentralized wastewater treatment, surface water, and aquatic ecosystem, and so on and so forth. So touch on different components of the water relevant research topics these days. For example, in Minnesota, a local problem is the chloride problem. Come from water softeners, because water in the groundwater, the drinking water in Minnesota is pretty hard in some area, because of the chemicals, the ions inside. So people use a lot of water softeners. We have to use salt. So the salt eventually released into the water. And also in Minnesota, it's cold. It's cold state, a very cold state. So in winter time, have a lot of snow because of the water. And we have to use salt, the snow reagent, trying to melt the snow. That's actually what spread out the sodium chloride into the environment. How to control it? There are a lot of study on that. And also trying to reduce the nitrogen fertilizer, as I just mentioned it, the nitrogen, phosphate, phosphorus that have been applied to crops, soybean. That's actually generally a lot of problem, towards to the lakes and rivers and so on and so forth. So the center try to control the nitrogen fertilizer and phosphorus fertilizer in a certain way, trying to minimize the contamination from the agriculture fertilizer. So that's actually a lot of work have been done by different researchers on campus, and actually work with the farmers locally. And also trying to address the urban stormwater, because you know, we have a lot of waters and rivers and so on and so forth, especially in southern Minnesota. There are a lot of stormwaters actually after, especially in summertime. And so how to deal with the stormwater, and actually in a yearly basis, so there are some researchers working with the local people trying to address that type of problems. So it's very diverse. So if you take a look the overall picture of the water resources center at the University of Minnesota, actually in the last year they have 33 active research projects and over 100 you know, faculties and full-time researchers been working on different topics. And there are over 6,000 virtual and in-person attendee on different you know, different trainings and online, especially online you know, training last year. This is actually talking about 2020. Even though there is pandemic, there are a lot of activities been going on virtually. You know, over 100 you know, events being organized by the center. So not mention, we train a lot of students, and actually 28 departments involved in the research center across the campus to do different work on the research part, education, engagement, and make a connection in between the community as well. So with this, I just give you an overview about the Water Research Center at the University of Minnesota. Now I spend a couple of minutes to talk about the water pollutant research working in my lab, especially micro sensors being working on in my lab, because my background is micro electromechanical systems, especially towards to micro nano sensors for water monitoring. Actually, Professor Brunner, Professor Derek Brunner, he and I have been working on the topic for years together, trying to develop different sensors for different pollutant sensing. And actually, I was very honored to get the Blaise Pascal chair from France, and he and I have been working on topics with a postdoc together, and actually interact with several colleagues like Martin Dan in France and many other you know, colleagues. I really enjoyed the experience in France for the last years. So my group, we've been working on heavy metal detections for many years. One example is actually we developed the arsenic you know, sensors, and actually Christian also interested in, because the tribe in Dakota actually have a lots of arsenic ions that actually contaminate the drinking water from the ground. So what we do is we develop a smaller sensor. If you take a look at the lower part of the smaller sensor, I don't want to go in detail, just give you a big picture of what we've been doing. It's a 3 electrode one, it's very tiny sensor. We use it, we do some surface coating, use material so-called inophone, is actually polymer matrix, only allow arsenic to go through it to make the sensor very selective. And then we use the sensor trying to do different detections. You can see here, this one, we can get the sensitivity. Actually, the detection limit is about 1 ppb. That's 1 parts per billion. It's well below the EPA standard. That actually we also build a smaller instrument, which is actually connected sensor, which is a kind of realize so-called wireless communication. So we can use that one, put on set of water to detect the water and transmit the signal wirelessly. And then from the terminal, like a computer remotely, we can get the signal from the lakes or river or underground or ground you know, water, trying to check the arsenic concentration out of it. That my student postdoc, they have been working on that. We also develop sensors to detect light, cadmium. This is actually, especially light in northwest of the United States. There was a big problem in the past in Michigan. That actually 50, you know, 500,000 people got affected because of the pipeline of light release. So this is a tiny sensor we coat with a knife-film, a different polymer matrix, trying to coat the materials for light and cadmium, this heavy metal detections. So we can also get around 1 or 2 ppb detection limits by using the sensor with a different coating. In our lab, we also do, you know, mercury detection. Actually, we did a lot of work because of the local problem in Minnesota. In early states, the mercury contamination in water is actually very severe. We're trying to do the mercury detection. Actually, mercury detection, the detection limits requirements much lower compared to other heavy metals. This is regulated by the EPA. So we need to try to get very good sensors for water detection. So this is actually the sensor, 3 electrode sensor. We do some coating using graphene, nanoparticle like gold particle on the surface, trying to increase the detection limits, reduce detection limits to a certain level. Like this one, we can get a 2 ppb level detection. And we also try to use some shrink polymer materials in order to make it miniaturized. That's not the target. We're actually trying to increase the sensitivity, reduce the detection limits. If you take a look here, this is a tiny sensor that we build on a piece of plastic with gold on the surface. And then the original sensor is like this, and then we shrink the sensor to a tiny size. In that case, the surface area being dramatically increased because it will keep the original surface area. So compared to a penny, it's much smaller than that. And then this is show you the SEM picture of the shrunk surface. It's very, have a lot of wrinkles on surface. They will allow us to capture the heavy metals easily by using the surface, the very rough surface. Using this one, we can do the detection. It's actually give us a few orders, 2 orders lower detection limits. We can detect 90 ppt. That's a parts per trillion detection limits. This is very, very low detection limits that we can detect mercury by using this technology. Not only for mercury, we can also develop it for arsenic to, if needed, we can detect very low concentration using the sensor. This is actually we've been doing for many years in the past. And in Minnesota, we have, in addition to the Water Resources Center, we also have one of the best so-called Minnesota Nano Center. We have a very good facility to do micro nano fabrication. That's actually one of the earliest, and this is one of the best, being sponsored by National Science Foundation. A lot of industry also using it. A lot of industry, local industry in Minneapolis also use the facility. Other academia, university, research institutes also use it. This is my lab. We dedicate to water detection and water purification. I did not talk about the water purification. We have a project also working on water purification. A lot of biological sensors because the environment relevant to human health. We work with the Mayo Clinic trying to do some biological detection using sensors, similarly as what we did. We have a very good facility, now in addition to the University of Minnesota Nano Center. So with this, I'd like to conclude my talk today. I think I may have a couple of minutes for questions. I'll get back to Kevin. Thank you very much for your attention. Yeah. You mute. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor. I just wanted to give the audience an opportunity to maybe raise a question using also speak up. Don't hesitate to raise your hands. If you think of any more questions during the webinar, don't hesitate to use the feature or to send us a message, an email as well, and we'll try to address all questions as quickly as possible. If there are no questions for now, I will just thank you, Professor, again for your presentation, and introduce quickly Professor Tariq Bourouina, who is one of your colleague, very close colleague. Professor Bourouina is currently full professor in physics at Élysée Paris School of Engineering, founding member of Université Gustave Eiffel, where he also served as an associate vice president for research. Professor Bourouina took several positions in France, in Japan, at Université Paris-Saclay and in different universities around the world. His current research interest is also on the micro-scale devices and nanomaterials. But in his presentation today, Professor Bourouina is going to talk a little bit more about the potential drinking water resources. And with that, Professor Bourina, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kevin. So I'm very glad to introduce the work that is being carried out in my university. So and I would like to give some illustration about how we can contribute to water-related issues using nanotechnologies. So just a very few words about the university. It's a newborn university which emerged last year, actually, as a result of the merger of 6 institutions. It has actually more than 1 century of history. It's just the mergers that made this university take a new name under Gustave Eiffel. This is our main campus is just halfway between the very center of Paris and Euro Disneyland, so you can pass through our university during your next visit in Paris. So, I mentioned in my presentation, and actually there are a couple of projects under the Future label, and the Future stands for French University on Urban Research and Education. And it received the eyesight label. It's a national French program of excellence label. And so our flagship is inventing the city of tomorrow. So just in a few words, the 3 pillars of our strategy is to contribute to the resource efficient city, the safe and resilient city, and the smart and digital city. So there are a couple of interesting questions and a lot of opportunities for deep technologies, including micro and nanotechnologies. So we do have in our campus 2 world-class experimental platforms. So one of them is dedicated to MEMS and nanosensor prototyping. So it's the SCA, so-called SCA Connect IoT platform. And on the other hand, we have a quite unique climatic chamber. It's district scale climatic chamber. It's called Sensity, and it allows us to conduct experiments under controlled climatic conditions. So, of course, we are contributing to multiple of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and one of them is clearly water resources. And the challenge, or for us, it's a challenge and also an opportunity to contribute to addressing those issues of water resources, taking advantage of micro and nanotechnologies. So in a very few words, the 2 challenges are first water quality, and we have an illustration about what can be done using nanosensors in the previous talk from my colleague, Professor Tianhong Cui. We do have many projects related to this topic, some of which are conducted with the contribution from Tianhong Cui, with the collaboration of University of Minnesota. And even for the second topic, the water scarcity. So we also propose some solutions, some alternative sources of clean water. And Professor Tianhong Cui also contributed to some of those projects when he spent actually in his leave since multiple years in our university. So I give an illustration about what we can do. So just to give you a first illustration about the smart water network. So consider drinking water network. So all the dots here, schematic dots, are sensors. So suppose you are able to put sensors everywhere along the drinking water network. And here we take the example of chlorine sensors. So then by the use of data that are collected throughout the network, you'll be able to actually reconstruct the pollutant map. It can be time resolved, and then a water manager can, when looking to this kind of interface, he'll be able to close, for example, close here the water, so that to avoid this chlorine contamination to spread out through the water network. So there are multiple opportunities to extend this concept to other applications like contamination from other kind of contaminants and even the localization of leakage. So there was a European project just ended named Proteus, and the challenge was to develop multifunctional miniaturized sensors based on nanotechnologies. And the goal was to provide 25x reduction on the cost, on the size also a 10x reduction, and multiple other capabilities. So just to make it short, we came out with this unique sensor which is able to measure up to 9 different parameters. 4 of them can be very helpful, for example, to detect leakage, so pressure, flow rate, temperature, and conductivity. So temperature actually needed for all sensors, just for calibration purposes. Conductivity can be an indicator of contamination. Then when we need to go into detail, we need to know what is this contamination. So there is a need for those chemical sensors. So 9 parameters on a chip of no more than 1 square centimeter and with a potential of reduction of the cost. So just to give you an idea about the power of those micro technologies. So here, this is a single chip mounted on a sensor. So those kind of chip can be produced using batch fabrication technology. So 20 wafers of these can provide you up to 1,000 chips, and then 1,000 sensors. You can imagine. So it's ease of deployment over a water network. So in this project, so we produce a lot of those sensors, and then we made the field testings. So one of those field testing was conducted in Portugal, in the city of Almada, for the proof of concept and improving the TRL of this technology. So I will switch to a completely different topic, which is the water contamination, not by chemicals. Up to now, we saw a lot of chemicals that are miscible in water. Here, the point is about the particulate contamination, which include biological particles and plastic particles. So among the biological particles, so there is actually a need and also opportunities regarding bacteria, but also protozoa. And for plastic particles also, so this raised recently a lot of concerns, and we tried to address this issue. So from technology point of view, when you consider micro technology, microfluidics, and so on, so there is a kind of opportunity when you look to the characteristic size of bacteria and protozoa. So they lie between 1 micron and 10 micron in dimension. In other words, viruses is really a challenge. If you need to consider them as a particle, is definitely another story. So, but for bacteria and protozoa, so here, for example, for bacteria, one attempt was to actually capture those bacteria in a kind of mechanical filters in a microfluidic channel, and then just observing those bacteria through a microscope, and then mixing the fluid here, which is surrounding the bacteria, just with very well-known liquids. The idea is to match the contrast when doing this mixing, so that to achieve the perfect match between the refractive index of the surrounding medium and the refractive index of a bacteria. As a result of this, we can get not only the shape and the dimensions of the bacteria, but also their refractive index. And it's a kind of biophysical signature to be able to tell whether it is E. coli or Shingilla or Vibrio. As you can see here, the numbers are different regarding the length, the diameter, and the aspect ratio, and the refractive index of those 3 different bacteria. So this is an opportunity to discriminate among those bacteria. So then the next topic is the protozoa. So protozoa are much bigger than bacteria, and they can be observed through microscope or through other imaging techniques. So as you can see here, so we have different types of protozoa like crypto and giardia, and images of other contaminants which are non-biological. So here we can understand that there is a room for identifying, recognizing those type of biocontaminants. Just like we are able to recognize the difference between a dog and a cat. So here we'll be able to recognize the difference between a crypto and giardia just through proper observation and image processing. So this is what has been done with a colleague from NTU in Singapore, and with a contribution from other French colleagues who are expert in image processing and deep learning. So the idea was to collect a large number of those particles using an instrument which is very widely used in biology for cell screening, which is called flow cytometry. It's used for cancer cell screening, for blood cell screening, and so on. But here we just exported this technology and use it for water analysis. And the particles here are no more cells. Actually, they are cells. They are biological cells. And we are able to construct a huge database. And by learning techniques, we are able to establish clusters to identify whether it is giardia, crypto, or non-protozoa particles. Okay, so the next topic is microplastics. So there are recent reports that show that bottled water actually contains a huge amount of microplastics, much more than tap water. So it raised concern whether it might have an impact on health or not. So and actually those reports are totally ignoring the smallest particles, those that are below 10 micrometers in size. So which suggests that the number can be even much bigger. So this is also an opportunity for us. But contrary to the biological contaminants, the plastic, we cannot recognize a plastic just by seeing the plastic, because plastic can take any shape. So you cannot tell, okay, I recognize this because it's a plastic according to this shape. So there is a need for an alternative identification technique. We can count the particles, but we cannot identify them like we did with biological contaminants. So this identification is just optical spectroscopy. So if we are able to implement optical spectroscopy, then we will be able to tell, okay, this is a characteristic spectrum of polystyrene or PMMA or PDMS, and this is what we used. Either Raman spectroscopy or FTIR spectroscopy can be very useful for this identification. So that's what we did. So we used a microfluidic chip in order to concentrate all the particles so that they all gather in this reservoir. It's no more than 90 micrometer in size. And just by seeing, by spotting here, we were able to see the nature of those particles, to tell whether it's plastic or not and which type of plastic they are. Okay, so there is also multiple capabilities that can be implemented in a microfluidic chip, like size sorting. So we get a series of reservoirs, and each of them will be related to either small particles or big particles. And then again, we'll be able to analyze by spectroscopy to tell what particle it is here for the bigger and what particle they are here for the smallest. Okay, so there are a spin-off company that emerged from the university. It's called Isonics, and it's just launched a few months ago. If I may have time, I'll just speak a little bit about water purifications that was mentioned by Professor Tianhong Cui. So we implemented a couple of techniques. So one of them is photocatalysis. And this was just a demonstration of integrating a nanomaterial, which is zinc oxide nanowires, inside a microfluidic chamber. And the idea, so this microfluidic chamber is no more than a few centimeters square in area, but inside it incorporates small features, much smaller. The idea is to inject dirty water here, and from the outlet we will get purified water. So how can this work? So it's a UV light illumination which will actually enable photocatalysis to take place here. And because the tiny channels here of the microfluidic chip, so this photocatalysis can be much faster than if we conduct it on a beaker on the macroscopic scale. So in only 5 seconds of transit time, we were able to demonstrate that 95% of VOCs diluted in water were destroyed, and water was purified. And also interesting is the order of magnitude of how much water you can purify with such a very small microfluidic chip. So it can be up to 1 liter per day. So even it's very small, it can. So it's just an exercise. We will not provide a commercial product from that, but it's just a demo of co-integration of nanomaterial, functional nanomaterials in a microfluidic chip for the purpose of water purification. So another emerging technique for water purification is the steam generation. So basically, if you have dirty water, you just evaporate and you collect the evaporated water, which is expected to be much cleaner. And enhanced solar steam generation involves this kind of materials. So this kind of materials are porous, and they need just to be put on the surface of the water. The purpose is just to enhance the heating of the water so that it will be concentrated only on the top. So as you can see, if you compare this photo and this photo, under the same illumination of sun, so here the surface is much, on the right side is much hotter than if you don't put anything on the beaker. So 28 versus 56, 56 will lead to faster evaporation. So there are a couple of materials that has been reported in the literature, recent literature on this topic. And we came out from our side with a kind of optimized material, which we call the meta foam. It's kind of foam metamaterial. And at the end, so what you can see here is this metamaterial. We control the pores of the size of the pores and the periodicity and so on. And also it has a very high absorptivity of the sunlight. And here, as you can see, so this is our results compared to results reported in the literature. So we are above state of the art, and we are quite close to the theoretical limit of the evaporation rate under one sun illumination. So maybe a very last topic is about collecting water from the atmosphere, is dew water harvesting. So actually, if you consider regions where there is almost no water at all, like deserts and arid regions, so there is still an opportunity to collect water, like these insects does. So there is a huge amount of water which is available in the air, and it requires efficient water harvesting technology. So we have the chance to have, as a collaborator, Daniel Bissens, and we have been working with him together with Chan Hong-sui, actually, and the postdoc that was recruited in the Chair Blaise Pascal of Prof. Chan Hong-sui was working on this topic, and we established this collaboration with Daniel Bissens, which, by the way, is also the president of the OPUR. It's an organization for the use of dew water. And I'm making some advertisement for his recent book on this topic. So Prof. Daniel Bissens had a lot of experience of implementing dew water harvesting plants all over the world. And it provides resources for people who need those resources and who has limited access to clean water resources. So we came out with this idea. How about if we think about water panels that looks like solar energy panels made of silicon, but instead of harvesting energy, they would harvest water from the atmosphere. So we studied this material based on silicon. It's called black silicon. It has unique properties, both optical, because it absorbs light, and then it emits light. So it has high emissivity, which is required for radiative cooling. Cooling is required for evaporation, for condensation to take place. And also, it has a faster sliding, which allows the water to be collected, not to just stick there over the surface. So this is just a photo to just show that this black silicon is really black, and also that its wettability is really exceptional. So, okay, so these are all our partners on the Nano for Water program. It's an open academic research collaboration platform. So if anyone has interest on this topic and would like to contribute, you are very welcome. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Professor Bolina, for the very informative presentation. A lot of different techniques and innovations. So that's very encouraging in the perspective of contributing to the SDG on water and another SDG. I just wanted to mention as well that we received like some questions from the audience, and thank you very much again for your questions. There was one in particular that was interesting to us who are working on the emerging technology and cybersecurity, from Zishan Han. Hope I don't butcher the name, but who was asking if, when talking about smart sensors in water network, if there were strategy to avoid cyber attacks on such water networks. And so I guess that's still an emerging topic, but that could be interesting to research more. Please keep sending the questions. And
yes. So regarding this question, you're right that even though we are focusing only on the sensor layer, so sensor is just part of an IoT, and IoT has multiple layers for transportation of the data, and of course, cybersecurity for all IoT problems, any kind of IoT is an important issue, but it's addressed by our colleagues who are experts in cybersecurity. So it's really a topic which is out of the field of my expertise as a physicist. So, but we do have colleagues in the computer science department who are working on this cybersecurity issue. In the frame of the Proteus project, actually we implemented field testing on a controlled platform in Portugal, but the issue about cybersecurity was not taken into account yet, because it's not a commercial development, an operational development at this stage.
Thank you, Professor. I hope that we can gather all the presentation with the agreement of all speakers today, and so that we can share this with the audience and all people that registered, and so that there are new interactions that could be fostered through this webinar. With that said, I would like to invite Dr. Dan Angelescu to present his work at Fluidion. Fluidion is a company that was created in Paris, launched in Paris initially, but now has offices also in Los Angeles, in California. Dr. Dan Angelescu is the CEO and the research director, and previously he also worked with Professor Bolina, Professor Tianlong Cui. And with that said, I will just give the floor to Dan to tell us more about the deployment of the different network sensors in bringing like the technology from the labs to the cities. Dan, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for the introduction. Yes, so Dan Angelescu, I'm the CEO of Fluidion and also Fluidion US, which is our US-based subsidiary. And I'm going to talk about our efforts on developing and deploying a range of autonomous sensors for measuring water quality in real-world settings. So how do we get from, wonderful research like what we've seen in the previous presentations, where we learn how, we can really improve the sensitivity of sensors and how we can really develop completely new functionalities based on nanotechnology and microfluidics and technologies like this, and how do we make out of that a product that's able to operate in the real world. So I'll make a short introduction for Fluidian. So we are a small company. We were started in Paris about 8 years ago, soon 9. And we have, since 2015, we have a separate company in Los Angeles. And it's a little bit, that's a little bit related also to my personal development. So as a young student, I came to Los Angeles, to Pasadena, and I was a student there at Caltech. Then I moved on to the East Coast. And then finally, I moved to France, where I was a professor at ESIA Paris. So I was a colleague with Tariq, and we had an opportunity to work on many projects together as well. So it's great to be in this this company and to present some of the results of work that I did after leaving the academic world and becoming the CEO of Fluidian. So very briefly, in Fluidian, we develop sensors to address a number of important issues for water quality and environmental monitoring. And specifically, we're talking about in situ microbiological quantification. That is measuring the bacteria in water, but in a river, in a lake, or in a bathing area, or in drinking water. So how do you develop something that's capable to count the number of bacteria that's very low generally, or should be low, to count it precisely, to be able to tell whether that water is safe for swimming, for example, or not. Another area where we work are chemical measurements of water quality. And here we're looking on one hand at issues like nutrient pollution in surface waters. And we saw in Professor Kui's presentation the effects that nitrates and phosphates in surface waters can have on developing of algae and other things. But also we're talking about pollution of drinking water. And here we're talking about certain phenomena that can happen, such as nitrification, which are endemic to chloramine disinfection, and that can completely destroy water quality in a water reservoir. And how do we measure that? And then I'm going to briefly introduce a new development, which is a mobile sensor deployment platform. It's an aquatic drone that we developed to be able to take our sensors and deploy them on a lake in coastal water, or to measure across the whole width of a river, so that we don't only get point-wise measurements at one site, but we actually get a map of pollution, and we're able to really identify and clearly map the sources of that pollution. And finally, we also focus on full-scale IoT data telemetry, and we have a lot of experience of how to get that to be done securely. And we have developed a data analytics and early warning platform that allows our clients to get signal when something is happening in their installations, and to be able to address that. So basically, we provide a lot of technology-driven innovation for water quality monitoring, and we touch a lot of areas. So we develop new protocols for measuring different bacteria and chemical parameters. We implement them in using technologies such as microfluidics and optofluidics, and we also develop the electronics around these sensors. We deploy them in the field. And then we have the interfaces to collect the data from such sensors and be able to display them and be able to extract information from that. So I'll first talk about in situ microbiological quantification. And well, you're all aware that, our rivers carry not only the water that, melts from the mountains, but they also carry our poop. our wastewater. That's usually, the water we drink and the water we use ends up in the sewers. It's treated, and then it generally sent back either in coastal waters or in rivers, which carry it to the sea. And then it evaporates and the cycle replenishes itself. So obviously there is a risk associated with that, so that water needs to be properly treated, but even the best treatments still leave some bacteria in the water. So it's really important to be able to monitor for these bacteria and other pathogens, because this really tells you whether that water is safe for use, either for bathing or for use for potabilization. And we've developed, actually, we have a brand new product that just came out, which is the second version of our in situ bacterial analyzer. So now this analyzer uses the single used cartridges. They're essentially they allow to take a sample to do a full measurement. They contain the reagent, and we do 3 types of optical measurements over time during incubation. And this allows us to deploy systems like what you see here in the Paris area. This is in the Seine River. So we can deploy such systems that perform measurements automatically. So we get E. coli measurements every day in the Paris area at multiple sites. We've been getting multiple points a day for the past 5 years. And now we're doing this a little bit all over the place, also in the United States, in Los Angeles, in Massachusetts, in Washington State, in New York City, etc. So, this data, we do a lot of studies to try to make sure that these sensors work well and that the data they provide corresponds to the data from the lab. And now we're at the point where actually it's so accurate that it's actually as good as the lab. And that took us a few years to get to this point. But now, using the latest technologies we've developed, we can reach actual accuracies that are similar to the lab. So these sensors have been used by a number of clients and organizations. In this case, it's the California Water Quality Regulator, the California Water Quality Board of San Diego, that uses our system to get measurements in the Tijuana River. The Tijuana River comes from Mexico and then goes down and comes into the sea near San Diego. And the problem is that it's extremely polluted, and that there are a lot of canyons where raw wastewater gets into that. And that's very difficult to treat. So you have to figure out how to do that, and you have to be able to monitor that in order to give early warning and close the beaches when there is a lot of pollution coming. So the California regulators have used our system to do that, and the data looks really good. Basically, it correlates well with lab data over 8 orders of magnitude. So this is an example of a time series from Paris. We're looking here these are 2 systems that are installed at 2 different locations in the Seine River, and you see 1 measurement per day. The red lines are the rain events, and their intensity corresponds to the amount of rain on that day. So you see that the big rains, like what we see here, for example, create big microbiological pollution. This is because the sewage system is unable to take all that water, so there is overflow of the sewage system, which is called combined sewer overflow, and that sends a lot of bacteria in the river. So this kind of studies, for the first time that the city of Paris is able to actually see with the sensors how long such a pollution event can take. And it turns out sometimes it can pollute the river for close to a week. So we can provide this data in a quantitative way and allow the management of all kinds of activities, including the bathing in the summer in the canals in Paris at La Villette. Here we show 2 examples from the United States. So recently the USGS adopted our system and is one of the beta testers of this new alert E. coli measurement system. And the first system is being deployed in the Delaware River in Philadelphia. The second one will be deployed in New Jersey and near Washington, D.C. later on. And this is another example where our system is used at one of the biggest wastewater plant in the world, and I think the second biggest in the United States, which is the Los Angeles Hyperion plant. And LA Sanitation uses our system in order to measure the efficiency of the disinfection process. And this is part of a much bigger project that Los Angeles has, which is to have 0 wastewater sent into the ocean. So all the wastewater is going to be recycled, re-injected into aquifers, and reused as as new water, if you'd like. So it's going to be recycled locally. So we help this kind of big city projects to be accomplished and to provide a risk assessment of how well the disinfection is done before that water is being reused. This is in another corner of the country. We're moving north. This is Washington State, and we're looking at Lake Chelan, which is this pristine lake up in the mountains where a lot of, you know, the people from Seattle go on the weekends to do boating and swimming. And this lake was subject of a program that from the Sea Grant program that installs pump out stations for the boats in order so the boats do not throw their waste into the lake. And the program was extremely successful, and today Lake Chelan is one of the places where we measured the lowest concentrations in E. coli from all the places where we've deployed these sensors. So I'll move now on to the next subject, which is, okay, how do we monitor chemicals in water? And I'm going to talk about a subject that's really specific to the United States. A lot of the United States have started using chloramine for disinfection of the drinking water. The chloramines have fewer byproducts, disinfection byproducts, which can be toxic. But on the other hand, the chloramines, especially in warm weather, they can decompose and they can create nitrite, which then there are nitrifying bacteria which turn that into nitrate, which now becomes a nutrient for all kinds of bacteria. So you can get a bloom of bacteria in a water tank, which is due to this decomposition of the actual disinfectant. So we work with the city of Los Angeles, and this is under a project which is sponsored by the National Science Foundation, in order to develop an analyzer that can provide early warning of such water quality degradation at drinking water tanks. So this is the water quality team at Los Angeles with the director, Marlene Stasiak, and then this is our engineering team and some of the field people. And here you see this analyzer, which is a microfluidic analyzer, which can measure multiple parameters, and it's really small. So this is the full analyzer with everything it needs. And what you see next to it is all the infrastructure that was needed previously to do just one measurement, which is chlorine, total chlorine, using an analyzer by one of the leaders in the market. So we do 4 measurements. We measure chlorine, we measure pH, we measure total chlorine as well, and nitrites, and it's in a much smaller form factor, and this is due to microfluidics. So you can watch the data from the sensor coming online on our platform and in real time. And in this case, we watch a nitrification event live. So what you see in blue here is nitrite concentration measured every half an hour by our analyzer. And you see here over the last few hours that the nitrite concentration goes up from, you know, like 10 ppb to something like 80 ppb. And the chlorine concentration drops down. So basically this means that there is a bacterial bloom which produces nitrites and consumes then the nitrites and then consumes the chlorine as well. So we can detect this in real time, and then we can do this for a long period. This is a 1-year deployment, and what you see in red are early alerts that we've given. Here you see the nitrite concentration. So basically we're able to detect every single nitrification event that this happened in this tank and to provide early warning, sometimes by up to 2 weeks before the tank was actually treated by the utility. So we can improve water quality for over 30% of the time in a situation like this. So that's a great value to these utilities, especially in the warmer state, but nitrification also happens up north. So finally, the last thing I'm going to talk about is a new development, which is this aquatic drone, which is essentially, it is a workhorse which carries a lot of sensors. It also carries a certified sampler that we developed that can collect samples for later laboratory analysis. So it can be deployed on in this case, on the right, you see it on a reservoir, which is the Hollywood Reservoir in Los Angeles. And the city of Los Angeles uses it to measure water quality and to identify the sources of pollution in such reservoirs, which should be pristine. But the reality is that there are always, you know, sometimes there are people swimming in it, which is illegal, but it does happen. Sometimes there are some discharges that shouldn't happen, but do happen sometimes. So being able to identify that is critical, and our drone is able to do that. So it's being currently used by by utilities in both France and the United States, and it's starting to spread throughout Europe. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be taking any questions that you have. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Dan, for your presentation, and it's great to see that the work being done, the research being done in labs are able to be deployed with the cooperation of, with the partnership with the cities and to see all these technologies. I see one question from Vijay Jagannathan, who was asking about the opportunity to access green funds to maybe bridge any viability gap in the development of technologies, and I'm not sure if you have some thoughts about that. And
I'm sorry, you'd have to repeat. I didn't understand the question.
I think Vijay was asking about the opportunity to access like a green funds, some kind of like a financial source of funding to be able to bridge any viability gap that you may face when you're developing your technology, and if that's something that you've considered. Or
well, not green funds. I'm not sure what green funds are exactly, but we do apply and we do develop this technology thanks to a lot of grants that we have received over the years. And for some of the technologies, we received grants, for example, from the French government, for the French company. And then for specific technologies which are critical to the US situation, like this chloramination monitoring, we received a grant from the US government, which is through the National Science Foundation. So yes, we do have, sort of we try to reach those grants through scientific excellence as much as possible, and providing technologies that are needed and that are vetted by the specialists and by the reviewers. But we haven't had experience with I'm not sure what green funds are, but yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Thank you again. And with that, I would like to invite Dr. Christine Marie to present her work. Dr. Christine Marie Georges is an associate professor at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in the Department of International Health. She's an epidemiologist, an environmental engineer, and her career focuses on identifying transmission routes for environmental exposures and the development of water, sanitation, and hygiene intervention. And I'd like to, if you're ready, Christine Marie, her work in the development of these interventions and how that can help investigate and prevent the spread of diseases.
Thank you for the opportunity to present. Let me know if there's any technical challenges that I can switch over to another Wi-Fi connection. So as Kevin said, my name is Christine Marie Georges. I'm an associate professor at Johns Hopkins, and it's my pleasure to present on today our study entitled the Strong Heart Water Study. And the study focuses on both developing and evaluating the effectiveness of participatory intervention to reduce arsenic exposure among private well users in American Indian communities. And so I'll start my presentation by giving some background on myself. And so as Kevin said, my career to date has focused on identifying transmission routes for environmental exposures in different settings across the world, and then using that to develop community engaged interventions targeting water treatment and hygiene interventions to reduce these exposures. And then evaluating these interventions using randomized control trials. And so I currently direct studies in 3 different countries. In Bangladesh, I focus on approaches to reduce diarrheal diseases among susceptible pediatric populations, among young children, particularly in a hospital setting, because really often when a patient comes to the hospital with diarrhea, their family members are at very high risk of subsequent infections. For diseases like cholera, it could be 100 times higher. And so our emphasis is on how can we intervene in these high risk settings to exposures to enteric pathogens for young. We also utilize mobile technology to send behavioral recommendations. I think my internet's unstable, so I'm going to switch over to a different connection. Give me 1 second here. All right, I'm back. Kevin, can you confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, Christine Maria, I can hear you.
Okay. So in Bangladesh, we focus on strategies to reduce enteric among young children. And then in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, we focus more on cholera. And so we work in South Kivu, which is the area that's endemic for cholera. Cholera is a severe diarrheal disease that, if left untreated, can result in death. And so we partner with communities as well as the Ministry of Health in South Kivu, Democratic Republic of the Congo, to develop community engaged water treatment interventions and hygiene interventions to try to reduce the number of diarrhea patients that are coming to health facilities in this setting. And so for today's presentation, I'll focus on our work in partnership with the 3 tribal nations in North and South Dakota. And the rationale behind this study is that in the US, it's estimated that there are over 2 million individuals exposed to levels of arsenic in drinking water that exceed the Environmental Protection Agency guideline of 10 micrograms per liter. And so this is a large number. And to the greatest extent, it's naturally occurring. So it's naturally occurring in groundwater aquifers, but you also have industrial inputs such as mining that could also be contributing to elevated arsenic exposure. And so here you can see a map from the US Geological Survey showing the distribution of arsenic around the US. So the areas that are orange or darker are areas where more than 25% of the water samples collected had arsenic that was above the Environmental Protection Agency standard of 10 micrograms per liter. So you can see in Maine and New Hampshire, there's elevated arsenic, as well as some areas of Texas, North and South Dakota, which I'll focus on today, as well as in the Dakotas, the Four Corners areas in California. And I should note that my beginnings in arsenic was actually 16 years ago, and I was working in this area here in Western Nevada. And we tested a woman's well for arsenic, and she actually had 2,000 micrograms per liter of arsenic in her drinking water. And if you remember, the guideline is 10. So her water was 200 times higher from the well that her family was using. And her husband had actually passed away from bladder cancer, which is associated with chronic arsenic exposure. And her daughter had the first case reported in the US of arsenic-induced skin lesions. And so arsenic is definitely a problem in the US. However, there's limited interventions to try to reduce this exposure. And so for today, I'll focus on the Strong Heart study. And so the Strong Heart study is a cohort study looking at risk factors for cardiovascular diseases among American Indian populations. And so the study's been going on for 20 years. And as part of this study, urine samples are collected from participants and tested for a range of different compounds, but including arsenic. And so urinary arsenic can serve as a marker of arsenic exposure. And so through the Strong Heart study, it was identified that chronic elevated arsenic exposure in these American Indian communities was associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, as well as cancer mortality of the lung, prostate, and pancreas, diabetes, and kidney disease. And so these findings that demonstrated the health implications of chronic arsenic exposure in this population led to the need to develop community-driven approaches to reduce arsenic exposure. And so my colleague, Annanavat Asian, and I submitted an R01 grant to the National Institute of Health to implement interventions in partnership with communities to reduce exposure. And so this grant was funded, and it's a 5-year project. And the objective is to develop and evaluate the effectiveness of participatory interventions to reduce arsenic exposure among private well users. And our focus was in the Strong Heart studied communities that were in North and South Dakota, because these were communities that to date had not received arsenic mitigation interventions. And when talking about arsenic, I should also note that arsenic naturally occurring in the groundwater aquifer most highly affects rural communities across the US, and in particular private well users. And private wells are not regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency. So the onus is on the private well user to ensure that their water is safe to drink. And this means the onus is on them to test the water as well as have water treatment technologies. And so that's why I think that this presentation today really ties into the other presentations in terms of the technologies that were presented to be able to detect the compounds in the drinking water. And in particular, there's really a need in our communities for technologies that community members can use themselves to be able to test these pathogens or these heavy metals in their drinking water. And so the design of the Strong Heart Water Study, which builds on the previous Strong Heart study, was to develop a conceptual framework for delivering an intervention to reduce arsenic exposure from drinking water. And so very often a technology is developed to reduce an exposure, but it's just given to communities or given to a household without any reinforcement and without any health promotion, and also not taking into account contextual, technological, and psychosocial factors that could be driving people's use of their current water source. So in the context of our 3 partner American Indian nations, some of these factors, for example, at the structural tribal level, are market availability of water treatment technologies, as well as current national policies around arsenic mitigation. These are sovereign nations that have their own policies. And so what are their policies around water quality, for example, as well as water rights issues? At the community level, as I mentioned, for private well users, the onus is on the person to test their well. So how do they gain access to water arsenic testing services? And so this is a community level intervention that was really needed even before an arsenic treatment technology was introduced. Because if people don't know the arsenic concentration of their well, they can't know if it's safe or not and whether they need to treat their water. And at the household level, contextual factors that are important are things such as, does the household have indoor plumbing? We're working in really rural communities in this setting. And so the type of water treatment technology that can be implemented is based on the existing resources in the household. And at the individual level, factors that are really important are user preferences around water. And so through our study, we identified that some households were able to be connected to the municipal water supply in these nations. However, they didn't want to be, because they felt like their private wells, their water was fresher and cleaner for them to drink than the municipal water supply that had chlorine and other disinfection byproducts in it. And so these are important considerations, again, when designing interventions targeting communities. And so the first aim of the Strong Heart Water Study was to develop a sustainable participatory arsenic intervention through formative research and community engagement. And so this was initially implemented through a series of in-depth interviews, which were hour-long interviews that were open-ended with private well users, with elders, with community leaders, to really learn about what are the priorities in the community related to water and what are the preferences for interventions. And this same approach was taken in our community workshops, where we brought the same group of stakeholders together to design an intervention. The intervention shouldn't be coming from the professors or the researchers, it should be coming from the community. And so these approaches facilitate community discussion. And so through these approaches, we developed our intervention and then our pilot. And so I'll just briefly describe our community workshops. And so this is a photo from our first one that was conducted. We had community elders, private well users. We had community members that worked at the Environmental Resource Department, as well as the Water Resource Department. And through these discussions, we were able to identify the community priorities related to water. And so there were a series of ranking exercises where community members voted on what issues they thought the focus should be on. And so here you can see for water-related priorities, something that was really important in the community was around water testing. and in particular, the communication of water testing results. Communities reported that people had come in, tested their water, never provided the result, or provided them the result in a way that they didn't know what to then do about that. Also, there was a need within the community for education and information around water quality, and also a better understanding what are the sources of contamination. And so this is where these water sensing technologies would be really valuable in our partner American Indian communities, as well as the need for sustainable approaches that were affordable for communities. And so through these findings, we developed our intervention. And so now I'll go through the intervention that was developed for the Strong Heart Water Study, and I've divided it by each key behavior that we're targeting. So the first one is obtaining an arsenic test for your well. And so as I mentioned before, there's a need for an infrastructure there. And so we partnered with the community, and the community led the development of a water arsenic testing program. And to promote this program, there were posters that were put up around the community, newspaper ads, radio, sections in the radio where community members talked about the need to test wells for arsenic and to protect our loved ones from arsenic exposure, as well as mailings. And something I should note about arsenic is that there's no taste, there's no smell, there's no odor. So the only way that people know that their well has arsenic is by testing it. And we discovered misconceptions in the community where people thought boiling, for example, would remove arsenic, but actually it concentrates it. So there really was the need to send out this information to encourage people to even come in or to contact us to get the water arsenic testing. And so here I show the community water arsenic testing program that was developed. And so this was community led, where community members collected water samples from households and tested them for arsenic. And so because we didn't have these wonderful sensing devices, we sent them to a local laboratory, and they were analyzed by inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry. And so a total of 552 wells to date have been tested for arsenic through this program. And about a third of them had elevated arsenic. So 179 wells had arsenic above the Environmental Protection Agency standard, and some had up to 200 micrograms per liter. So we found high levels of arsenic within these communities. I should also note that the communities requested risk communication maps. They wanted a way to be able to see what the distribution of arsenic was across their communities. And so I show an example here, and they also asked that the maps not be identifying, so that let's say my household has elevated arsenic, so everyone doesn't know that. And so we created 5 mile by 5 mile grids that anonymize the households. And the color red is showing areas where the arsenic is elevated above 10 micrograms per liter. And so this was really valuable for the community in terms of their planning around arsenic mitigation. And so if a household was found to have elevated arsenic through this program, we then we called them to let them know, and we sent a mailing with their results. And beyond just arsenic, this was an area where there was elevated uranium present. And so we also did uranium testing as part of our program. But to give you a sense of the cost, to test arsenic and uranium in drinking water was around $30 US. So it was expensive. And so if a water sensing technology could be implemented at a lower cost, that would be really valuable in this setting. And we also sent out a mailing again to emphasize the importance of proceeding with receiving an arsenic mitigation option. And so as part of this program, which was conducted in partnership with Indian Health Service, we installed an arsenic removal device, a point of use arsenic removal device in households that were interested. And this is an absorptive media filtration system. And this particular model is from MultiPure. And at the bottom here under the sink, you can see that the cartridge is installed down there. And then on the top of the kitchen counter is a filter faucet. And only the water coming from the filter faucet is arsenic safe, not the water coming from the main kitchen faucet. And so this is important in terms of a behavior change intervention or a health promotion program to remind people to always use the filter faucet. The flow rate is slower for the filter faucet because it has to pass through the filter. So people may become frustrated, for example, and switch over to the kitchen faucet. And so we emphasize that the kitchen faucet, the main faucet indicated here, should only be used for washing the dishes, or washing your hands because arsenic can't pass through your skin. But for your drinking and cooking, you should be using the filter faucet. And so accompanied with the filter itself, we had a series of videos that were developed and included testimonies from elders in the community on the importance of arsenic testing, as well as the need for having an arsenic removal device installed in the home. We had households, including the children that were on the video, talking about how they're using a filter faucet and how they navigated challenges, for example, preparing big meals, how they were able to accommodate that. We also provided promotional materials to remind them to use a filter faucet, so cups and mugs, a tanker to store water for when they had to make those big meals, so it was easier. And also a very important aspect of the intervention was maintenance of the device over time. And so cartridges don't last forever. And so we included an indicator light on the filter faucet, which is here, that flashes red when it's time to change it, so households knew. And we also accompanied this with a video of a community member changing the arsenic removal cartridge to explain to households how to do this. And we've been really fortunate that we've been able to continue our study through the COVID pandemic. And so initially we had done a home visit in these households, and now we've accompanied it by phone calls to households, text messages. We're also using Facebook as a tool to engage households. And so these have all been very valuable platforms to engage households virtually through the COVID pandemic. And so now I've given you an overview of the intervention that we've developed. And our current work is focused on conducting a randomized control trial of this intervention in our 3 partner American Indian communities. And so for this randomized control trial, we have 2 study arms. It was considered unethical to have a control arm that received nothing. So if people have elevated arsenic, they need a water treatment technology. But what we did compare is the standard approach in the US, where a water treatment technology is given, but no additional reinforcement. So basically someone comes in and installs your device and they just gives you an instruction manual. And comparing that to this intensive community-driven approach through phone calls, contacting people by Facebook, as well as home visits. And the outcome that these 2 arms are comparing is urinary arsenic as a measure of arsenic exposure, because we want to see if delivery of these interventions are going to reduce arsenic exposure within these communities. And so this trial is currently ongoing. Even through COVID, we were able to restart our activities in September of last year. And so to date, we've enrolled 100 participants in our study, and we're following these individuals for 1 to 3 years. We're collecting urine samples. We're also collecting blood. And another secondary outcome that we're going to look at is to see if delivery of these interventions reduces biomarkers of cardiovascular disease within these communities. And it should be noted that this is the first randomized control trial of a arsenic water treatment intervention in the US. So there's never been a study like this where point of use arsenic removal devices were installed in homes and households were followed up and looked at their urinary arsenic concentration. So we're very excited to see the outcome of this study and interested if it's effective to scale this intervention in other rural communities within the US. And so with that, I would like to acknowledge my study collaborators, which include Annanavas Asian at Columbia University, as well as my colleagues at Missouri Breaks Industries Research Incorporated, which is a Native American-owned research entity, as well as my colleagues at Johns Hopkins, Indian Health Service, which has been our partner throughout, as well as our environmental consultants and the tribal housing authorities in our partner nations. That have done the installation of the arsenic removal devices, as well as my colleagues at MedStar Health Research Institute. And so with that, I would be happy to address any of your questions, and I've included my email address up at the top. And so I'd be happy to address any questions you have about our study in our partner American Indian communities, as well as our work in Bangladesh and in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. George, for your presentation. And I think it's a great message that you're sending out also regarding the interaction between technology and but most importantly, the deployment of this technology and how community engagement is really important. And that's something that we also take very seriously in our work at the embassy. When we're thinking about emerging technologies, it's not only about developing this technology, but how do we get this technology to be used by people and understood by people. So I think it's great to have your work presented alongside those of our colleagues in France and the US. And I think Professor Borina had a quick question that may have been addressed. I don't know if Tariq, you want to
Actually, I have part of the answer because I saw the at the end the technology that was used for the purification. But my question was about the cost of those technologies. So both for the water purification to remove the arsenic and also you mentioned $30 for one measurement or for one sensor for measuring the arsenic content.
So thank you for your question. So the $30 US was for testing for both arsenic and uraniums together. So each water sample that we were sending to the local laboratory was costing us $30 US. So it was quite expensive.
How about the cost of the purification device and how often do we need to change it?
So the device itself is $225 US, and the cartridge needed to be changed every 800 gallons. And this was based on water quality assessments that we did, where we took several of the filters that were installed in our pilot households, and we measured the arsenic concentration over time, in addition to other water quality parameters that could interfere with the efficacy of the filter, such as phosphate. And so we determined that 800 gallons was around the time before they started to fail.
Thank you very much. So we understand the need for low-cost sensing technique, at least.
Yeah, and that's why I'm really interested. Dr. Chu and I are interested in collaborating on the arsenic sensing devices within our partner communities. And the communities also expressed a strong interest in wanting access to this type of technology so that they can test the arsenic concentrations in their wells themselves.
And this is just another opportunity for me to really encourage anyone in the audience who is interested in the works presented today to reach out to our speakers or to come back to us with questions, and then we can relay the information and also share like the presentations that were from today. So thank you again.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Another question? Can I ask another question, Christine? Is the situation specific to US only to have those amounts of arsenic and uranium in private wells?
That's a great question. And actually, I had lived in Bangladesh, and in Bangladesh, there are estimated to be over 30 million people that have arsenic in their wells that exceeds the EPA and World Health Organization guideline of 10 micrograms per liter. And so I've conducted 2 randomized control trials in Bangladesh focused on community-driven approaches to reduce arsenic exposure in those settings. And so arsenic is really a problem globally. There's even data showing in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where I also work, that arsenic is a problem in that setting.
Well, thank you again for the questions and also the answers that you provided. With that, and keeping time in mind, just wanted to, oh, sorry, is there anyone? Okay. So I just wanted to quickly introduce Dr. Martin Hendel, who is the assistant professor in the energy department of ASA Paris, the School of Engineering that we've mentioned already at the beginning of the event. His research is on urban climatology and focuses on the study of urban cooling to reduce pedestrian heat stress during heat waves. And with that said, I'll just leave the floor to Martin, if you're ready, to talk about the Wise Cities research project. Martin,
yeah. Good evening, good morning. Can everybody see my screen? Is it working the way it should be?
Yeah, it is working.
Hello, my name is Martin Hendel, and I'm indeed associate professor at the Essier Paris Engineering School, which part of the Université Gustave Eiffel. I'll be talking briefly about the water, energy, soil nexus, and more in depth about applications of that in the fight against urban heat island or urban heat. So I want to talk about a project that's been ongoing for the last couple of years, which has involved a lot of colleagues within Université Gustave Eiffel, which has been part of one of the structuring projects around this new university, Université Gustave Eiffel. So WISE Cities stands for Water, Energy, Soil Interactions for a Future Sustainable Environment in Cities, of which I am a co-PI alongside my colleagues Bernard Legouvelot and Patrice Chatelier. And the main focus, as you can guess, is this water, energy, soil interaction part. So what we're talking about here is water urban management practices, technologies, and infrastructure as a starting point. And the idea is to see how this can interact with energy and soil issues. So when we say energy, we're talking about, heat, cold, and work in the thermodynamics sense. So like electricity or mechanical movement. And then when we're talking about soil, it's a bit more complex. There's more multidimensionality to that. It's soil in the sense of land, like availability in an urban context where you have to choose between infrastructure, buildings, and public spaces. It's also soil, the substrate, which can be both growth media for plants or the substrate that has an active role in the water cycle, so for infiltration. And it's also, urban ground and underground. So it's several dimensions in there, above ground, below ground, etc. So a few keywords to try and give you an idea of what we're looking at is things like decentralized energy production, rooftop or not rooftop urban agriculture, sewage or not sewage, heat and cold recovery, public space and rainwater management practices, urban cooling, things that will be at the interaction, at the interface between water management and these energy and soil issues. So this involves, I haven't listed all the participants, but colleagues from different parts of Université Gustave Eiffel are involved. Some of them were connected earlier. I don't know if they still are. And the main question that we're trying to address is how can urban water management contribute to sustainable energy production and land use? So it's looking a lot at the multifunctionality of infrastructure and practices. So we're also looking at how people do it themselves and what's done, what's not done. A brief project outline would look something along these lines. So we've got a state-of-the-art of water, energy, soil nexus applications, which I will go over very briefly. We've got two tasks or work packages that are looking into detail at, on the one hand, sewage waste, heat and cold recovery at the building or district scales. So this involves some measurement, field measurements, as well as in the pilot experimental setup we have in Université Gustave Eiffel called Sense City. And it also has a lot of involves some simulation work into how heat recovery works from a physical standpoint, a heat transfer standpoint. We've also got a big part about how alternative rainwater management practices affect district or urban scale water catchments and water pollution as well. And then the last part is regroups about the urban modeling and simulation of environmental performance, depending on different scenarios involving the water, energy, soil applications that we're going over. So the project is really cross-sectoral and interdisciplinary. So we've got sociologists, we've got hydrologists, we've got engineering scientists, and so on and so forth. We're working with a couple. So the project interacts with other projects within the Université Gustave Eiffel community, which involves industry, urban industry on the one hand, and then urban stakeholders on the other. So that's around this case study area within the Grand Paris region, which is not really the greater metropolitan area of Paris. It's a subpart. It's half of the population of Paris, of the greater metropolitan area is in the Grand Paris administrative boundaries. So some examples to kind of illustrate what this foggy west nexus thing means. So I mentioned the heat and the cool recovery in urban networks, so that water networks. So that can be heat recovery from sewage lines. It can also be cold or cool recovery from drinking water or non-drinking water or processed water or whatever, water that's not necessarily particularly warm. A very good example is green roofs, which can or cannot be used for agricultural uses. So this is going to be promoting biodiversity. It's going to be cooling the building. It's going to be providing some cooling perhaps at the city scale or the district scale, thanks to the evaporation that may be going on. Rainwater management, big impacts on that. As well as perhaps, so rainwater is not necessarily very dirty, but equivalent infrastructures on the ground level, such as swales and stuff like that, will be doing some water treatment by filtering as well. So these are issues that we're trying to capture and we're looking at. So as I was mentioning, the group, those two work packages that are specifically looking at the heat recovery and the alternative water management practices are being led by colleagues who are experts in those fields. And today I'm going to talk to you about a bit more in detail about an example of this water energy soil nexus, which was kind of, it may surprise you. It's something that I've studied extensively called pavement watering, which is a practice of, or I guess you could call it urban transpiration. So it's urban cooling via, making a city sweat, so to speak. So before I get into the details of what pavement watering is, I want to talk to you about why we talk about urban cooling and what is the urban heat island effect. So you may have heard that cities are affected by something called the urban heat island effect, which is basically the observation that city centers are warmer than their rural or unurbanized surroundings. This has nothing to do with topography necessarily or anything else. It's the same climate. This is an effect that's been known since the late 19th century. It was first observed by Luke Howard in London and shortly thereafter in the rest of Europe and many other cities around the world. For a city such as Paris, but this is true for London, it's true for any number of cities that are comparable in size, so tens of millions. The order of magnitude of the difference that you're going to observe between the city center and the rural areas is around 3 degrees C. So you can just multiply that by 2 offhand, so it's about 6 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Warmer on average in the city center compared to the rural or unurbanized area. And this is purely the effect of the presence of the city and everything that goes on in it. We'll get into the details. So, so 3 degrees C or 5 degrees Fahrenheit, that sounds fine. In the winter, everybody's happy to be doing less heating, right? The issue arises when we're talking about summertime periods, specifically heat waves. So for Paris and Western Europe, which was very hardly hit during the 2003 heat wave, the amplitude is not 3 degrees, it's more like 8 or 10. 10 is definitely not rare when it's clear skies, low wind speeds, especially in summer. So 10 degrees is a big difference. And during the 2003 heat wave in France, 15,000 people died. For Paris, the city itself, which is this kind of boundary here that you might be able to make out, if anybody can see my mouse, which is not, or my cursor, which is not a given, I suppose. I shouldn't take that for granted. In any case, this area here in the center of this map experienced an increase in mortality by more than 2-fold. And that's related to the urban effect, in addition to the concentration of population density, right? So what creates urban heat islands? So there's a number of causes. I like to list them this way. We have something called radiative trapping, which is mostly due to 2 factors. It's the shape of streets, how buildings or how we build cities. So we usually have a street with buildings on either side, right? And this is called, in urban climatology, we call this shape the urban canyon, because basically pedestrians are at the bottom of the canyon and the walls of the canyon, or the cliff is the buildings we've built. So we're all cliff dwellers in this analogy, and pedestrians are at the bottom. And so this is a very strong, this shape has a very strong impact on how radiative exchange is taking place within the street. So as you can see here, incident solar energy is being absorbed and multi-reflected against other urban surfaces. Each of these being absorbent is going to create higher overall absorption than if you just had a flat surface with the same reflectivity. This same thing happens at night when these surfaces are trying to radiate that heat in the form generally of infrared light back out. That light is being emitted onto other urban surfaces. So this creates a lot of inertia, or really slows down the cooling process at night. The other big issue is lack of evapotranspiration. So that's the lack of green space, soil sealing, impervious surfaces in general. So what evapotranspiration is it's the evaporation of water by vegetated surfaces. So plants, when they do photosynthesis, are using water. The leaves are pervious to gas exchange. And so in the leaves, you've got evaporation taking place. And as everybody knows, when they've seen themselves sweat in the summer, evaporating water off a surface cools it down. So that's why the body sweats. We sweat because we're trying to get that water to evaporate and absorb our extra heat. The same thing happens at a larger scale for areas that have high vegetation and high unsealed soil rates. Of course, it depends on climate, but in any case, cities tend to be more desertic or more arid, or have fewer green surfaces and unsealed soil surfaces than their surroundings. This is definitely not true of areas such as Phoenix, Arizona, where it's the reverse. The urban area is actually greener than the surroundings. But apart from those specific situations, so city in an arid environment with lots of lawns and irrigation, generally cities are drier from that perspective. Another factor is wind obstruction. So these buildings that we've set up and that we've built are now slowing down airflow. Airflow does two things. It renews the air, so you can get rid of air pollution that way, and it also transports heat with it. And these buildings are slowing that wind speed down and impeding this heat and mass transport. So the air pollution is has more difficulty being blown away. And then the last factor is anthropogenic heat. So anthropogenic heat is any energy that anybody uses in a city. So having a webinar on urban climate, among others, running your air conditioning, running your car, any energy that you use ends up, whether it be electricity or whatever, ends up in the form of heat. The only heat that you emit that escapes the urban system would be light pollution, which you can see from space because that's how far away it's gotten. That's the only energy that used on site that's not being turned into heat and contributing to the localized warming. So this is particularly a big issue for air conditioning, because not only are you using electricity which ends up in the form of heat outdoors, you're also pumping the heat from your house and you're sharing it with everybody who's in the neighborhood. So those are the big factors. And so when it comes to solutions or answers in terms of urban cooling techniques and urban heat island mitigation solutions, basically you're going to be addressing each of these mechanisms. So radiative trapping, usually you try and increase the reflectivity of urban surfaces. So pavements, asphalt concrete pavements are typically very not reflective because they're very black and dark colored. It's also true for the rest of the solar spectrum. And so we try to, something you can do is, and it's done in the US actually for California, for example, under Title 24, is to promote cool roofs, cool surfaces that will reflect a lot of that heat away. Everything related to urban greening will help because all that extra greenery and water availability that you're creating will promote evaporation of the water, which will increase humidity, but not the air temperature. So depending on the climate, this will work more or less. Typically, the more tropical or subtropical you are, it will help, but it may tend to, in certain situations, it can increase humidity beyond comfortable levels. Wind obstruction is something that's been looked at a lot, specifically in Hong Kong. Problems with urban ventilation were closely tied to the SARS-CoV-1 epidemic back in 2002. So they've done extensive work on how to promote urban wind permeability. I think one of the big clusters for SARS-CoV-1 was 2 of these buildings being very close together, and basically one apartment block on one level contaminating neighboring towers because of poor ventilation. So that was a big issue that they've been doing a lot of work on. A few European cities are working on it too, also on the grounds of ventilation and air quality. And then for anything related to anthropogenic heat, any measure that's going to promote energy efficiency, the less energy you use, the less heat you will be automatically creating or injecting into the urban fabric. You can also, when we're talking about air conditioning, what you see here is switching from air-cooled air conditioning units to geothermal, or here this is Paris. So Paris has one of the largest, at least European urban cooling district systems, where the cooling is provided by the river. And so because the specific heat capacity of water is way bigger than that of air, you can inject a lot more heat into the water without increasing its temperature anywhere near as much as you would have done for the air. And so among these solutions, if you want to look at this lack of evapotranspiration, you can promote urban transpiration via what's called pavement watering. This is an example from South Korea, where they're actually using water that has seeped into underground subway stations with this spraying infrastructure, which is built into the road system. And they turn these things on 3 or 4 times a day, depending on the season and the weather conditions. It's used in the winter for cleaning, or it can even be used for de-snowing or de-icing, because it's quite warm water, because it's underground, right? Aquifers with a stable temperature. That's true for Japan as well. But it's used also in the summer to promote cooling. So if we look back, this is something Paris has looked at quite closely at. If we look back, we realize that it's actually a very old practice. It's called uchimizu in Japan, and you've got this kind of graphics where you've got depictions of people in their summer kimonos, which are called yukaras. They've got their bucket, they've got their ladle, and they're going outside, watering the space, the public space in front of their shop, in front of their homes. And it promotes cleaning, it promotes cooling. And if you look around the world, you'll find that anywhere, even in areas that don't necessarily have that much water, such as Rajasthan, people will use, so they're not using the same quality of water, of course, but they will use their wastewater or gray water to try and keep dust clouds from forming, to try and keep the space in front of their house or shop clean and cool and welcoming. Paris has done this in the past. At least as early as the late 19th century and into at least the mid 20th century, there are detailed maps that were written up by the engineers of the time, where they say which street needs to be watered how frequently, depending on the weather conditions. And the purpose of this is because at the time, the streets are cobblestone paved, and in between the pavers, there's dust accumulating all year round. And so in the winter, when it's all rainy and humid, that dust is with the moisture is kept on the ground, right? But in the summer, when it gets dry, as soon as there's the slightest breeze, this becomes a dust cloud, and it's extremely uncomfortable for pedestrians. And so something to the point where there's an actual method and technique that's developed at the time to keep that from happening. So you've got these maps of that ends up being the people like this guy connecting this old school hose to the non-potable water network. Paris has the specificity of having 2 water networks. So there's drinking water, and then there's what they call here the non-potable drinking water, which is basically untreated surface water. And so here you have this old school hose being connected to it and being used for street cleaning or dust cloud prevention. And if you read the text from the 1920s, they say, okay, we've got these new machines coming out and that we're buying more and more of, and these things have the equivalent of a vacuum cleaner, and so dust isn't going to be a problem in the next decades. But be careful, because the inhabitants, these weird people, they think it's good because they feel cooled by the watering. And so unsurprisingly, 100 years later, the city of Paris hired me actually to take a look at this into some, with modern techniques, I guess. So the question that was being asked is, could emergency watering be used during a heat wave? Could we be trying via this urban transpiration to create, measurable cooling with a significant impact for pedestrians? And how much water are we using? So I'm gonna have to speed up a little bit because I see I'm running low on time, but so we set up some experiments in Paris, which have now extended to, at larger scales and with other cooling techniques, where we tried to quantify the cooling effect. So we had 2 sites at the time, and with one we were just using very experimental and very simple watering approach with a cleaning truck and then someone operating a manual hose just to water the sidewalk and pavement in 2 different parts of Paris. So I'm going to skip through this. And so basically these are the principal findings. So what you see is that the area that's been watered all day versus the area that's been in the sun all day without being watered is about 10 to 15 degrees cooler in terms of surface temperature. So this infrared picture here really captures that effect. Everything that's blue is either been in the shade all day because it's been under parked cars, or has been watered the whole time. While the red and the white, which is really the max of the scale here, is not cooled at all. We had pavement sensors in the street itself, in the pavement, that were looking at what heat storage dynamic was for the pavement. Was it storing heat? Was it releasing heat? And what we see is the comparison between these red or orange days, which are dry, and the blue days, which are watered, is that you're more than having that heat absorption, heat storing factor from the pavement. And so this did translate, and we were hoping that we would find that, we were able to find that it does translate into measurable improvements of thermal heat stress for pedestrians. So we look at an index called UTCI, which is the Universal Thermal Climate Index, which gives you a measure of thermal heat stress, which is really the indicator you should be looking at for health effects. And so you were getting up to 3 degrees cooling in equivalent UTCI temperature at the warmest part of the day. However, it had relatively weak impacts on urban heat island, but that's okay, because when urban heat island has the highest intensity, there's almost no one outdoors, because the highest intensity is reached around 3, 4, 5 in the morning. And pedestrian traffic's really low at that time, oddly enough. And so this 3 degrees was being reached, this peak cooling was being reached by at around 6 p.m., which for us was the peak traffic. And then the last thing we were looking at was the water consumption. And so what we found was that, unsurprisingly, really the cooling was principally due to the evaporation of that water film. And so you didn't need runoff to be forming at all. And so this meant that we could, compared to our experimental conditions, we could at least divide our water consumption by 5. And if you did this and scaled it to kind of target those 10% warmest areas that you really want to work on, this would work out to about 6,000 cubic meters of water per day, which is about 2.6 liters per day per capita. So this is less than a gallon per person and per day. And very quickly, and I will go over this much faster, we ended up having to look at different paving materials or different urban materials, because we very immediately saw that the road, which was made of asphalt concrete, was not behaving the same way as the sidewalk, which was using a small aggregate or fine aggregate asphalt mix. And so we've, over time, developed expertise in studying these paving materials and urban materials in terms of their behavior under heat wave type conditions. So this is some lab work we did, and we look at how much water different kinds of pavement require to reach that cooling, the optimum cooling performance. We have a number of field studies, so we've just gone over this one, but we now have some looking at new asphalt materials that are not only trying to be cool, but they're also trying to be quiet or low noise. We're studying about 10 of Paris's schoolyards, which they're turning from basically parking lots with trees to a more park-like design. And we've worked with some industrial partners on other ideas. And now we have been able to scale up the knowledge and experience we've accumulated over the years to help decision makers at a strategic level, so this was for the city of Paris, think of which areas they should be targeting first with the highest priority. And this can also be scaled down, this kind of analysis, to provide design support. So this is an area in the for the Olympic Games that we were looking at in terms of an initial design that was leaving a few hotspots here and there, including areas that were supposed to be rest areas for pedestrians. And this is the alternative design where we've implemented these different cooling techniques. And so we're able to look at different things and in a time frame which is compatible with design work, because it's very quick. If you take 10 years to come out with 1 minute of data, then they've gone on to something else, and the design has been completely revamped. So that's about it. This is a short slide to talk about me and my team, but I think we'll just skip it. Thanks for listening, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Martin, for your presentation, and thank you for keeping it within the time constraints. So that's great. I'm happy to hear any question if the audience is wanted to ask something about the project. And again, if not right now, we're always happy to receive your messages, or you can contact directly the speakers as well. I don't see any question at the moment. So I'll just maybe take the opportunity to talk about the future events that will be held under the Cities of Tomorrow series. So there's going to be a third webinar on May the 19th on the topic of new urban mobility and looking at electromobility in particular. So the information will be sent out to all registered participants today. There's also another French-American Innovation Days that is happening with our colleagues at the Consulate of Los Angeles, and it's entitled Facing the Predictably Unpredictable, and it will take place on May 18th through 20th. And you can find the information in the chat. My colleague just posted out the link to the Eventbrite and all the information for registration. Thank you again all for your for attending today, and we'll be in touch very soon for more information and for more events. Thanks to all speakers as well for all the great presentations, and I'm hopeful that this can lead to further interactions in the future and research collaboration.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you.
And the French Embassy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers, stay safe.